Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're digging into a really, innovative idea that actually came straight from one of you, our listeners.
That's right.
It's a proposal looking at more sustainable funerals.
Mm-hmm.
The core ideas are extracting water from the deceased for reuse and then using the organic remains to grow trees in these special pods.
Exactly. It's proposing quite a fundamental shift, really, in how we handle end-of-life practices. And the driver behind it is, resource conservation.
Particularly water, right?
Mm-hmm.
With climate change making fresh water scarcer.
Precisely. The proposal even, interestingly, draws a line to the film Waterworld to kind of hammer home that urgency about water scarcity.
Huh. Okay, so it's a provocative starting point.
It is. It makes you think, could our final act actually help protect this vital resource?
So our mission here is to really unpack this. We want to get into the technical side, how it might work, what the benefits could be.
And the challenges, too, of course.
Right, the hurdles, and how they actually propose making this happen.
Okay, so let's maybe start with the core concept itself. Break down those two main parts you mentioned.
Good idea. First up, the water extraction. Now, the human body is, about 60% water, which sounds like a lot when you actually stop and think about it.
It really is. And the proposal argues that recovering this water could be, a valuable new source. They estimate for an average 70-kilogram person, you might get back something like 37.8 liters.
37.8 liters. Wow. That's nearly, 10 large reusable water bottles?
Yeah, roughly that. And the idea is this water could then go back into the system agriculture industry.
Maybe even household use eventually.
Potentially, yes. Easing the strain on existing freshwater sources.
Okay, but how? How do you actually, extract that much water and make it usable? It sounds quite complex.
It is a detailed process they're proposing. It involves 5 main steps, starting with something called alkaline hydrolysis.
Alkaline hydrolysis, okay.
Think of it as like a chemically assisted, accelerated version of natural decomposition, but in a very controlled environment. First, the body's placed in a special stainless steel tank.
Right.
Then you introduce a solution. It's mostly water, about 95%, with just 5% potassium hydroxide. This is heated to around 150 degrees Celsius under pressure for maybe 3 to 4 hours.
Okay, so it's not just draining fluid, it's actually breaking down the organic matter to release the water content.
Exactly. It liquefies the organic material. After that step, they use vacuum distillation. This is supposed to recover about 90% of the body's moisture content.
90%, that's efficient.
It seems so. Then comes purification. To make the water safe and usable, it goes through reverse osmosis.
Ah, okay, I've heard of that. That's a pretty standard water filtering method, isn't it?
It is, yeah,
Right.
widely used. And then the final step is distributing that purified water back into the existing water networks for whatever purpose it's designated for.
Okay, that clarifies the water part quite a bit. So let's switch to the other main component, these tree burial pods.
Yeah.
You mentioned they were inspired by something. Capsula mundi.
That's right. Capsula mundi is this Italian concept, these egg-shaped pods for burial with a tree on top. This proposal definitely builds on that idea.
So what happens to the material after the water's extracted?
Well, the remaining organic material, which includes bone fragments, gets processed. The bone remnants are dried and ground into a fine, mineral-rich powder.
Right.
This powder is then mixed with bioplastics. The source specifically mentions cornstarch-based ones and also mycelium.
Mycelium, like mushroom roots.
Essentially, yes. It acts as a natural binder, kind of holding everything together as it forms this biodegradable pod structure.
And it's specifically egg-shaped, like the capsula mundi idea.
Yes, they stick with that egg shape. And inside this pod, there's a core designed to hold a tree seed, which the family chooses.
So you could pick an oak or a maple.
Or maybe an apple or cherry tree or something native to the local area. That core isn't just holding the seed, though. It's also packed with nutrients, things like nitrogen, phosphorus.
Wow, to give the seed a good start.
Exactly. Help the tree establish itself. And apparently there's even a separate little compartment inside just for that seed and its starter nutrients.
So instead of a coffin, you're planting this potential tree.
Yeah.
What about the personal touches and the actual planting?
Personalization seems really key here. Families choose the seed, maybe something meaningful to them or the deceased, and they choose the location too. Could be a natural cemetery, private land, maybe even part of a reforestation project.
Okay.
And here's a really modern twist they suggest, adding a QR code plaque to the tree.
A QR code? What for?
So you could scan it with your phone and access like digital memorial photos, stories, maybe videos about the person's life.
Wow, that's quite something. Linking the living tree to a digital legacy.
It really bridges the traditional and the modern, doesn't it? As for planting, the pod goes about 1 to 1.5 meters deep, good soil contact for the seed. And then over the next 6 to 12 months, the pod itself just naturally breaks down,
Releasing the nutrients.
feeding the growing tree. The whole process from the start of water extraction to having the pod ready, they estimate takes about 48 to 72 hours.
Okay, got it. That gives us a really clear picture of the how.
Yeah.
Now, what about the scale? The potential impact. Let's talk numbers.
Right. The proposal does try to quantify this. They use Belgium as a specific example. Population around 11.7 million, mortality rate about 1%. That's roughly 117,000 deaths per year.
Okay.
If you take that 37.8 liters of water per person figure, that adds up to a potential yield of about 4.42 million liters of water, just in Belgium, every year.
4.4 million liters. It's hard to visualize that.
Think almost 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools every year, just from funerals in one country.
That is significant for a smaller country like Belgium. So what does that look like globally?
Well, if you extrapolate,
Yeah.
say 8 billion people globally, similar 1% mortality rate, so maybe 80 million deaths a year.
Okay.
Applying that same 37.8 liters per person, you're looking at a potential global water recovery of around 3.02 billion liters annually.
3 billion liters. Wow. That really puts the water conservation potential into perspective, especially for water-stressed parts of the world.
Absolutely. It's a staggering potential volume.
Which obviously leads us into the broader benefits they're claiming for this system. Water is clearly huge, but what else?
Well, beyond water, there's a major ecological plus. You're planting trees, potentially millions globally each year if this took off. That means reforestation, habitat creation, and crucially, carbon sequestration as those trees grow.
Right, taking Kuyu out of the atmosphere.
Exactly. And then there's the emotional side we touched on.
Yeah, I can definitely see the appeal of a living memorial, a tree you can visit, watch grow. It seems like it could be very meaningful for processing grief.
I think so, too. The proposal also highlights potential cost savings. They estimate this kind of green funeral might cost around 5,000 €,
Compared to an average traditional burial, which they peg at closer to 10,000, so potentially half the cost.
Significant difference.
And finally, there's the space-saving aspect. Traditional cemeteries require a lot of land. These trees could be integrated into landscapes, natural burial grounds, much more efficient land use.
Okay, so environmental benefits, emotional value, potential cost savings, and less land needed. It sounds compelling on paper, but how do you actually implement something like this, especially starting somewhere specific like Belgium?
They don't shy away from that. There's a proposed government strategy for, as they put it, rapid implementation.
Okay, what does that involve?
It's multifaceted. Raising public awareness about water scarcity is step one. Then, initiating pilot projects they actually named Ghent, aiming for 2026, with a suggested $5 million subsidy.
A pilot project makes sense. Who would be involved? They mentioned collaborating with Natuurpunt, which is a major nature conservation organization in Flanders, and also KU Leuven, the university, presumably for research and validation.
Right.
Alongside that, actively pushing for legislative changes to make these practices legal, plus public campaigns to build acceptance, and even aiming for EU-level collaboration to get regulations aligned across member states.
That sounds ambitious.
Yeah.
What about the existing funeral industry? Funeral directors, crematoria.
Yeah.
How do they fit into this picture? That seems like a potential bottleneck.
It's a critical point, and they address it directly. The idea isn't to replace the industry, but to help it evolve. They propose a new revenue model.
Okay, how would that work?
Funeral directors could offer the water extraction service itself. Then there's the production and personalization of the pods, choosing seeds, maybe offering premium pod materials or designs.
Ah, so different options.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Plus, facilitating the tree planting ceremonies. They suggest these could incorporate existing religious or cultural elements, maybe partnering with groups like Natuurpunt for suitable planting sites. They even propose offering ongoing maintenance contracts for the memorial trees. And, interestingly, a potential share in the revenue from selling the recovered water.
Selling the water. So they estimate this could actually be a viable business model for funeral homes.
They seem to think so. Their estimates suggest a potential total income per funeral ranging somewhere between €2 and 6,700, depending on the options chosen. The aim is clearly to make it competitive with current funeral costs.
So providing a sustainable alternative that's also economically viable for the industry, They even mapped out a timeline for bringing funeral directors on board.
Yes, a three-phase plan, starting with training and pilot programs in 2025-2026, then scaling up infrastructure from 2026 to 2028, and aiming for nationwide adoption, potentially with some kind of branding, between 2028 and 2030.
It's very detailed. But of course, any plan this big faces challenges. Does the proposal acknowledge the potential roadblocks?
Oh, absolutely. They dedicate a fair bit of space to outlining potential challenges and, importantly, proposing solutions.
Good, because you can't just ignore the difficulties. What kind of things do they anticipate?
They group them into categories: ecological, economic, social, cultural, religious, technical, and regulatory.
Okay, let's touch on those. Ecological challenges.
Things like potential soil disturbance as the pods degrade, the energy needed for the whole water extraction and processing part, and whether all tree species are suitable for every location or soil type.
And the solutions.
Thorough soil testing before planting, using renewable energy to power the facilities, and careful selection of native or appropriate tree species. Pretty sensible stuff.
Makes sense. What about economic hurdles?
The big one is the upfront cost, the specialized equipment, the facilities. That's a major investment. Also, uncertainty about the market value or demand for the recovered water. And, naturally, potential pushback or competition from parts of the traditional funeral sector.
Right. How do they suggest overcoming those?
Government help, basically. Incentives, maybe low-interest loans to cover those initial costs. Trying to secure long-term contracts for the water, especially selling it to industries or regions that really need it. And, as we discussed, actively bringing existing funeral directors into the fold through training and this new business model.
Okay. And socially, culturally, I imagine that's where some strong opinions might surface.
Definitely. Socially, they acknowledge potential public squeamishness, maybe, about the idea of water extraction from remains, practical issues like access for people in rural areas, and just general emotional resistance to changing long-held traditions.
Yeah, that's understandable.
Culturally and religiously, too. Specific beliefs about how the body should be treated after death, traditional rites, these could conflict with the proposed process.
So how do they plan to navigate that sensitivity?
A lot rests on public education, explaining the process respectfully, highlighting the environmental and memorial benefits. They suggest exploring things like mobile processing units for rural areas, offering very personalized ceremonies that can incorporate diverse beliefs, and crucially, engaging in direct dialogue with religious leaders to try and find ways to adapt the process respectfully or develop acceptable protocols.
Open dialogue seems key there. What about technical and legal issues?
Technically, ensuring the water purification is absolutely foolproof is paramount. Making sure the chosen seeds actually germinate reliably in different pod and soil conditions, and just the sheer challenge of scaling up the infrastructure if this became popular.
Right, and solutions.
Continued R&D on purification tech, rigorous testing of seeds and pod materials, using modular designs and local sourcing for pods to make scaling easier. Regulatorily, the big issues are existing laws about handling human remains, the need for standardization if this goes international, and obviously health and safety oversight.
And the plan there?
Proactive lobbying to get laws updated. Working with international bodies, maybe like the EU or ISO, to create standards. And involving public health agencies from the start to ensure everything is safe and properly monitored.
It really sounds like they've tried to anticipate the counter-arguments and have strategies ready. Let's zoom out again. Thinking globally, if this did catch on, what are the really big implications?
Well, we talked about the water, that 3 billion liters annually is potentially transformative for water-scarce regions. Think agriculture, sanitation, even drinking water after appropriate treatment.
Huge potential.
Then the trees. 80 million new trees planted every year. The impact on reforestation, carbon capture, fighting climate change. It's massive.
Especially if they prioritize native species, boosting biodiversity.
Exactly. And you have to contrast that with the current options. Traditional burial uses resources, land, sometimes embalming fluids. Cremation uses a lot of energy and releases emissions. This offers a fundamentally more sustainable path.
And the land-saving aspect becomes even more critical globally, with growing populations in many areas.
Absolutely. Economically, besides the industry shifts, you have potential cost savings for families worldwide, plus the real economic value of that recovered water.
The social and emotional benefits we discussed, the living memorials, the connection to nature during grieving, those seem universally relevant too.
I think so. The proposal argues it fosters a more meaningful way to process loss, and the digital legacy via QR codes adds another layer. Culturally, they position it as a respectful modernization of tradition, not a rejection of it.
Interesting framing.
Politically, any nation adopting this could really position itself as a leader in green innovation and sustainability. It helps meet sustainable development goals. Technologically, it drives innovation in biotech, green chemistry, maybe even smart city integration with the QR codes. And health-wise, it avoids potential pollutants from traditional methods and uses hygienic, contained processes.
It's a very broad spectrum of potential benefits they're outlining.
They really pull it all together: the water, the CO reduction, the cost, the space, the economic value. It's a compelling package.
Okay, so given all that potential, what's the call to action? How do they propose actually kicking this off and driving the change, especially against potential inertia?
They have a pretty detailed action plan for mobilization and reform. It starts with building a coalition in Belgium. They call it the Belgian Green Funeral Alliance.
Bringing stakeholders together.
Exactly. Environmental groups, industry people, researchers, policymakers. Then, concerted lobbying efforts to get the laws changed, both in Belgium and pushing for EU harmonization. A big public awareness campaign is planned, Planten voor de toekomst, planting for the future, using media, education, highlighting those QR code stories.
Making it relatable.
Right. Getting that Ghent pilot project up and running quickly is crucial to provide real-world data and demonstrate success. They aim for 1,000 bodies processed initially to show the water and tree yields. And even using diplomatic channels, the UN, EU platforms to promote the concept internationally once it's proven locally.
They've even budgeted it.
Yeah, an initial estimate of around 10 million for these first steps. They outline the expected impact cascade. Belgium first, then influencing the EU, then potentially global adoption. The underlying message is really one of, well, urgency combined with opportunity, a vision for a much greener approach to something fundamental.
It is certainly ambitious and incredibly thought through, especially coming from a listener source. So wrapping up this deep dive, what are the main things that stand out to you?
For me, it's the elegance of tackling two major issues at once. The environmental pressure point of water scarcity and the need for more sustainable, maybe more meaningful ways to handle death. It connects them in a really innovative way.
I agree. It's that dual focus. The potential environmental upsides are enormous, the water, the trees, the Kyoto, but it's coupled with these potential economic benefits, the space savings, and perhaps most powerfully, that emotional resonance of a living memorial. It really forces you to question our current norms.
It does.
Yeah.
And the sheer level of detail in the proposal is impressive. They haven't just thrown out an idea. They've considered the science, the engineering, the economics, the social hurdles, the implementation steps. It shows real depth of thought.
Absolutely. Which brings us to our final thought for you, our listener. Take a moment and really consider this. What if our final act, our return to the Earth, could actively contribute to healing the planet? If it could help conserve water, grow forests, create living legacies, what does that future look like to you? What personal or societal or even ethical questions does it raise? It's definitely something profound to mull over.
Indeed it is.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive today. We hope this sparked some thought, and we encourage you to keep exploring these ideas about how we can live and perhaps even leave more sustainably.